This comes from Matthew chapter 11. These are very famous words from Jesus. Matthew 11, chapter 11, verse 28 to 30. And this is what it says. And Jesus said, "Come to me, all of you who are weary and carry heavy burdens, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you. Let me teach you, because I'm humble and gentle at heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy to bear, and the burden I give you is light." In 2005, there was a store called Minneapolis. Now you can guess where that was. It was at the Mall of America in Minneapolis, but it was called Minneapolis. Some guy had the crazy notion that shoppers and people that were going about their busy lives would need a place to take a nap. And so he opened this store. I don't think it's there anymore. I don't think it caught on that well. The other option for napping is church. No, but that's another story. Anyway, all right. But it rented these really comfy spots. It was a little pricey. It was 70 cents a minute. Can you imagine? Just to go take a nap at this place. Listen to what they said on their website. Escape the pressures of the real world into the pleasures of an ideal one. It's not just napping. Some guests will want to listen to music, put their feet up, watch the water trickling in the beautiful stone waterfall, breathe in the positive ionization filtered air, enjoy the full body massager, and just take an enjoyable escape from the fast-paced lifestyle. That actually sounds kind of nice, doesn't it? Take a nice nap. Man, so good. People are tired. We're tired. One of the values that our session has come up with is the idea of rest, and that's a hard one to define. What are we talking about with rest? There's many ways to define rest, of course. We could be talking about physical rest. And of course, this is a very important kind of rest. If you're tired, you need sleep. If you can't sleep, you're going to be in a hurting way, because your body desperately needs sleep to get recalibrated and recharged. You've got to have that time. So if you've had an exhausting day, it's just nice to come home and relax and then wind down to bedtime, unless you're my wife, and then you just keep going. But that's another story right there. She doesn't need as much sleep as most humans do. I'm just going to leave it right there. All right. I'm also not talking about more extended time from work, like vacation. And we need vacation. You need a vacation from your work. You need time to just get away and not think about that and do something else for a while. So vacation is important, but I've heard so many times people say, "I need a vacation from my vacation." They come home from vacation and they're still tired. So what's going on with that? Why don't we rest even on our vacation? That's what I think our passage is talking about here. See, our bodies can recover quickly, right? But what we need is rest for our souls. We need rest for the deepest parts of our hearts. We need to stop being so restless. We need rest. We need to put it all to rest. So what do I mean, rest for our souls? Well, I don't think country music icon Merle Haggard had it together. He was very accomplished. 38 of his albums appeared on the Billboard's country music top 10 charts. More than a dozen made it to number one. He had 38 number one singles. But he also had 5 wives, and he spent time in San Quentin prison as well. So kind of a rough life. And this is what he says: "There's a restlessness in my soul that I've never conquered. not with motion, marriages, or meaning. It's still there to a degree, and it will be till the day I die. Maybe this describes your soul. I would dare say that it describes most of us. There's this longing for home and not quite sure what home looks like. There's this old African proverb. I don't know if this will go deeply into your heart, but this is what it says. Lord Jesus, make my heart sit down. Make my heart sit down. Has your heart been able to sit down? Or is your mind going 1,000 miles an hour trying to figure out whatever circumstances in front of you at the moment? Has your heart been able to sit down, or are you too busy getting things done? Has your heart been able to sit down, or are you too busy trying to numb the restlessness through TV, video games, or social media, or entertainment, or pleasure, or whatever? It numbs the ache for a while, but then the ache and the restlessness come back. So what will it take for your heart to sit down and be at rest? Our text says something very interesting, that it's not actually by stopping doing something. That was an awkward sentence, full of gerunds, which don't work very well. Our hearts, our passage says to do rather than stop doing. It's actually paradoxical. For you to get rest, you've got to do the right things, not stop doing things. Engaging in the right activities. So what I want to look at is just two very simple things from this passage, from these 3 verses today. 2 actions that lead to rest, no matter how counterintuitive it might be. And here are the 2. Number 1 is come, and number 2 is take. Number 1 is come, number 2 is take. So let's look at these one by one. Number 1, come. Verse 28, come to me, all of you who are weary and carry heavy burdens, and I will give you rest. So the first command is to come. Well, come where? Jesus says, come to me. So it seems simple, right? But it eludes us so often. We don't come to him that much. It's a simple command. If you're weary and you're carrying heavy burdens and you want rest, it begins with Jesus. There's no other way. That's what he's saying here. You want rest? Come to me. So why is it so hard for us? Or what are we not understanding about it? We've gone to Jesus, but we don't have rest. What is it that we're not getting? Well, I suppose that we should ask the question, what is it that burdens us down? What are the things that burden us down? In his blog, Aaron Kheriaty, that's the name. In his blog entitled The Era of the Narcissist, he points out how self-absorbed our era is. This is what he says. Of all the amazing features of the medieval cathedrals, one feature stands out as very strange to the modern mind. We have no idea who designed and built them. The architects and builders did not bother to sign their names on the cornerstone. People today might ask, why build the Cathedral of Notre Dame if you can't take credit for it? No lasting fame? No immortalized human glory? We're perplexed by the humility of these forgotten artists who labored in obscurity. Do and disappear? This is not how we roll in the America of the 21st century. All this humility and anonymity began to change during the Enlightenment. For example, when Jean-Jacques Rousseau wrote his book Confessions in 1789, he dedicated it to me with the admiration I owe myself. The book opens with these lines: I have entered upon a performance which is without example, whose accomplishment will have no imitator. I mean to present my fellow mortals with a man in all the integrity of nature, and this man shall be myself. That's real. Of course, we like to be, at least he was honest, right? We all do the humble thing, fake it, but give me some more in a humble way. Well, he goes on to point out a study that was detailed by two authors, Twenge and Campbell, in their book, The Narcissism Epidemic, and on the nature of narcissism today. So the individuals profiled in the book is what he says. The individuals profiled in the book are not the wounded souls who typically visit a psychiatrist's office in search of healing. They are instead the students of UCLA and Texas Tech and the parents who formed them. Individuals supposedly healthy and well-adjusted, even flourishing by contemporary standards. And yet when one looks beneath the surface, these are sick souls. So their conclusion is that narcissism is a psychocultural affliction rather than a disease. It's epidemic. We're consumed as a society with ourselves. Narcissism defines our culture. It's a self-centered view on everything. So then if we are self-centered, how do we measure our worth? How do we figure out how important we are, or how valuable we are? Well, there's only one way to do that, and it has to be by comparing ourselves to others. I am valuable compared to what other people around me are. If I measure up to them, I feel good about myself. If I don't measure up to them, I feel terrible about myself. So according to Moya Sarner at The Guardian, the deadly sin of envy is more present in our everyday lives than ever before, thanks to social media. She writes that not only do we compare ourselves to friends and neighbors as people have always done, but now online we measure up against people all over the globe, celebrities and strangers, friends of friends. One therapist has coined this comparisonitis, an emotional sickness which can't be intellectualized or curbed by willpower. She continues, no age group or social class is immune from envy. And then she says that Ethan Cross, professor of psychology at the University of Michigan, who writes, envy is being taken to an extreme. We are constantly bombarded by photoshopped lives, he says, and that exerts a toll on us, the likes of which we have never experienced in the history of our species. And it is not particularly pleasant. While we are busy finding the perfect camera angle, our lives become a dazzling, flawless, but hard shell, empty inside, but for the envy of others and ourselves. I wonder how that's working for us. In so many ways, we've never had it so good. We've never had so much stuff. We've never had so many privileges. We've never had so much comfort, and yet we've never been more burdened and weary, more depressed and anxious, more deeply unhappy and undivided, and more tired. Our focus on ourselves is actually killing us. It's killing us. So what do we do about it? Come to me, all of you who are weary and carry heavy burdens, and I will give you rest. But here's the thing about coming to Jesus. Here's the bottom line about coming to Jesus. We cannot come to Jesus in our narcissistic way. We don't come to Jesus with our own paradigm of how he's supposed to react. We don't come to Jesus expecting from him what we think he should do for us. And then if he doesn't do it, we're angry, we're frustrated. See, that's not the way we come to Jesus. If we want soul rest, we come on his terms. See, our passage this morning comes in a context. At the beginning of the chapter, John the Baptist is in prison, and he's confused. He's been preaching about the coming of the Messiah, and then he sees Jesus there. He baptizes him. He sees this display of power. The Holy Spirit comes down, and they hear the voice, "This is my Son, in whom I am well pleased." And John the Baptist is like, "Here we go, here we go." And then suddenly John finds himself in prison, and Jesus isn't doing anything. And he sends his disciples over there, and they tell us in verse 2 of chapter 11, John the Baptist, who was in prison, heard about all the things the Messiah was doing. So he sent his disciples to ask Jesus, "Are you the Messiah we've been expecting? Or should we be looking for someone else?" He's doubting that Jesus is actually the Messiah. The very thing he'd been preaching. Why is he doubting what seems like he had an expectation of bigger and greater things on Jesus' part? Perhaps he had the same expectation that everyone else did, that Jesus was coming to install his socio-political or geopolitical system. He was going to defeat the Romans, come in and take over and all that. He perhaps had that. Perhaps he was expecting at the very least that this Messiah would free him from prison. He was in prison unjustly, only because he had spoken out against Herod, who had taken his brother's wife. At the very least, Jesus, why can't you release me from prison? Well, we know how that ended. He got his head cut off. Jesus isn't living up to his expectations. And Jesus' response? Go back to John and tell him what you've heard and seen. The blind see, the lame walk, the leopards are cured, the deaf hear, the dead are raised to life. And the good news is being preached to the poor. Jesus was carrying out his own agenda. Not John's agenda. Not my agenda, not your agenda, no one's agenda, but his own agenda. And his own agenda is perfect. We love to put expectations on him and say, "Why aren't you doing things the way I want them?" See, we view our lives through the lens of our culture. Narcissism has taken over. We are self-centered, and we think he should give us the things we want. We've compared ourselves to everybody else. Everybody else has greater things than we do. It's all a lie because it's Facebook and whatever else. But we think everybody else has everything better than we do. We feel insecure. Jesus, where are you? Why don't you come to me right now? But Jesus doesn't say, "I'm coming to you." He says, "Come to me, and I will give you rest." It's my agenda. Jesus is not the good luck charm that we pull out of our pockets when things aren't going well, when we run to him once in a while. A desperation move. We're desperate. "Jesus, I need you now. Will you do something for me?" See, he's talking about something totally different. He's talking about a lifestyle. This is a lifestyle where I go to him over and over and over, no matter what is going on, no matter how I feel, no matter what I'm expecting. I confess my expectations, that I've had all these expectations of him. I confess it. I ask him to shine his light in my darkness. I ask him to peel back the layers of my life so I can actually see the self-centered expectations that I have had in my life. And I say, "You come and do what you want. Take your time. Do it in your timing, because your timing is always right. It's always good. It's always perfect. And I will submit. Not my will, but yours. Come to me, all you who labor." We want rest for our souls. It's his agenda. His agenda. Number 2, take. Verse 29, "Take my yoke upon you. Let me teach you, because I'm humble and gentle at heart, and you will find rest for your souls." So what does it mean to take my yoke? Well, we all know, we've heard it many times, what a yoke is. It's this wooden plank that was put on animals, oxen or donkeys or something like that. And what a yoke does is it doubles the power, really, because it's one solid piece that's pulling the cart, but then there's two animals that are pulling together. So the strength of two is given rather than just one. That's what a typical yoke is. But I don't think Jesus is talking about that kind of a yoke at all. Because what was present in that day, when you said the word yoke, if you weren't referring to farm animals, what you were referring to was what the Pharisees were preaching constantly. Their term for the way they used the word yoke was in relation to the law of God. The yoke was his law, and they told you to put on the yoke. In other words, you need to obey the law of God, and the consequences are really strong. You obey him to be accepted, and if you don't obey, you're not accepted. Strict adherence and obedience to the law of God. And they had laws for everything. I mean, there were laws for everything. They took the Old Testament, and then they added these laws. This is what the Mishnah is. And they added all these ways of interpreting. So for every law, you might have 10 or 20 laws to figure out all the little nuances. They had laws for the Sabbath. They had laws for sacrifice in the temple. They had laws for purification. They had laws for living at home. They had laws for how you treat your neighbor. They had laws for eating. You name it. There was a law for everything. How could you get it right? I mean, if your life depended on getting something right all the time, how would that make you feel? You would live a pressure-packed life. You've got to perform or you're not going to make it. And certainly no rest. Brothers and sisters, our society does no less. No less. We have felt that our worth as people depended on what people around us think. If you work at a job, you better perform or you'll be out of a job. These are true things. If you're a student, you don't get the grades, you'll flunk out. You better get after it. If you want to be liked by people, you better do certain things. Otherwise, they're not going to like you. We have to measure up in society. There is no other way. This is the way the world has been, and the Pharisees just took it and said, the law of God is here. If you want to get near God, this is what you have to do. Brothers and sisters, the law is exhausting. The law describes God's character. And who can measure up to that? And then Jesus says, take my yoke. So what's so great about his yoke? Isn't he just saying, okay, my yoke's a little lighter, but it's still a yoke. Still got to get burdened with the yoke. Okay, there's grace. We got to obey some. And, there's this fine line between two off on the law side and two off on the grace side. Let's go down the middle of the road here, a little grace, a little law. We just kind of get it right there. And that's what this lighter yoke is all about. We just put this on and Jesus is there and he's helping me through the storm and all the thing. That's not, I don't believe, what he's talking about. You know what's so great about his yoke? It's that it's full of grace. Let me put it in perspective for you. God created a perfect world. And he created mankind to share in his joy and his love. That's why he did it. He didn't need anybody to worship him. He's not a megalomaniac. He doesn't need people around him. He doesn't need anything. God is self-sufficient, completely self-sufficient. But he created mankind to worship him sharing the joy and the love of relationship. Okay, that's what he did. But mankind decided that they had a better idea, right? Of course, this was complete insanity because God had created them for this, and they decided this wasn't it. But this is their creator. It's like a fish saying, I don't want to be in the water anymore. I want to be up on land. I'm going to do this. It's that kind of insanity. That's what it was. And so the world was plunged into a self-centered darkness of narcissism. If we look around with any kind of objectivity at all, we are seeing that this is true in our world. You don't have to look very far to see what kind of self-centeredness is all out there. Of course, we think it's out there, but it's not here. Everybody else is two-dimensional. I'm complicated. I've got all kinds of nuances in me, right? But here's the kicker, and I'm getting to the yoke thing, okay? I'm getting to the yoke thing. Instead of destroying the world, which was completely within his right, God the Father covenants with God the Son to provide a way for these rebellious people to find their way back. Okay, you all know that. So at what price? The requirement for a reconciled relationship with God is perfect obedience. That is the requirement. That has never changed. That has never changed. If we want to see God, we have to obey perfectly. Who has done that? No one. No one. Now, here's the yoke. Here's the yoke. So, there are two things about his yoke, I believe. Two things about his yoke. The first one, he obeyed perfectly in our place. He obeyed perfectly in our place, okay? He was born into humility, humble place, no comforts, hard working, probably got sick, all the rest of it, and yet he didn't sin. And he was doing that for us because he knew that the only way we would get into heaven is if he were perfect for us, because none of us are. He obeyed perfectly. And he says, take my yoke because I'm gentle and humble of heart. Do you think he's the most humble person that ever walked the earth? He walked in perfect humility. He took the challenge that the Pharisees were throwing out there. The yoke of God is his law. And Jesus gladly put on the yoke that the Pharisees were talking about. And he walked with that yoke, that rigid law. He walked with the rigid law. And he obeyed on every single point. So you want to talk about a yoke? His yoke says perfection. So when we put on the yoke, what are we putting on? We're putting on his perfection. We're saying, okay, you're saying it's the perfect requirement of the law that I should obey the law? Here, Jesus, I want your yoke because you did it for me. You see that yoke? Perfection. But that's not the only thing that he does. Not only does he live perfectly for us, but somehow the sin needs to be atoned for. Somehow it needs to be done, and so he pays the ultimate price for us. Not only does the yoke, on one side of the yoke it says perfect obedience, and on the other side of the yoke it says it is finished. It is finished. The Lord of glory, who went to a cross to pay for us. He gave us a perfect life, and he died with our stuff. All of it. And he prints on it is finished. Do you want to carry that yoke? He says, come unto me. Take my yoke upon you. You're carrying the yoke of perfection, and you're carrying the yoke that says it is finished. And when Jesus died, he took our sin on himself, knowing that God's wrath would fall on him instead of on us. You see, when he took on that yoke, he knew what was going to happen. God's wrath would fall on him instead of on us. And he suffered punishment for us. He bought us with his sacrifice, and he reconciled us to the Father. Do you see what it means to take on his yoke? His burden is light. His yoke is easy, and his burden is light. It wasn't easy for him. Do we understand that? He tells us to come and rest. Why? Because he didn't get the rest. He didn't get to. There was no rest for him on the cross. It was pure burden. It was pure wrath. It was hell on earth. And he died and he suffered all that and he had no rest so that we could come in and get rest. And we forget these truths so much. We're burdened with guilt and with shame. We want to feel better about ourselves, so we make attempts to measure up. And Jesus is gently whispering to us, "It is finished. I've taken care of your problem." The problem of restlessness is directly linked to the gospel of Jesus. I like the way Ray Ortlund puts it in this parable. We were married to Mr. Law. He was a good man in his way, but he did not understand our weakness. He came home every evening and asked, "So how was your day? Did you do what I told you to? Did you make the kids behave? Did you waste any time? Did you complete everything I put on your to-do list?" So many demands and expectations. And hard as we tried, we couldn't be perfect. We could never satisfy him. We forgot things that were important to him. We let the children misbehave. We failed in other ways. It was a miserable marriage because Mr. Law always pointed out our failings. And the worst of it was he was always right. But his remedy was always the same: do better tomorrow. We didn't because we couldn't. Then Mr. Law died. And we remarried. This time, Mr. Grace. Our new husband, Jesus, comes home every evening and the house is a mess. The children are being naughty, dinner is burning on the stove, and we've even had other men in the house during the day. Still, he sweeps us into his arms and says, "I love you, I chose you, I died for you, I will never leave you nor forsake you," and our hearts will melt. We don't understand such love. We expect him to despise us and reject us and humiliate us, but he treats us so well. We are so glad to belong to him now and forever, and we long to be fully pleasing to him. Being married to Mr. Law never changed us, but being married to Mr. Grace is changing us deep within, and it shows. You want to rest? It's only Jesus. That's the gospel, and it changes everything. Let's pray.